Chris and Michaela, thank you for joining us. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Michaela, you go first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela. I have a background in basketball. I've played, I've had the opportunity to coach, and I've been with Layup since February, so right before the pandemic. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, my name is Chris Penrose. I've been with Layup since November, so not much earlier. And I think that Michaela and I are, part of the growing team at Layup and part of the kind of shift of the organization. My background is in a mixture of youth work, going back 2 decades, and also journalism, communications, and working around like the creative industries, from visual art to film, photography, music, and yeah, bring all that to the table every day at Layup.
That's amazing. Thanks for the introduction. It'd be great to get a bit of an introduction to Layup itself. Could you bring us through a little bit about what your organization provides and how it works, how your programs work?
Yeah, for sure. So Layup Youth Basketball is a cost-free program based in Toronto. We work in both neighborhoods that are designated as neighborhood improvement areas, but also maintain some of the former priority neighborhoods as important neighborhoods. I think the equity index that was used to shift away from priority neighborhoods is something that leaves neighborhoods that we think we should be in out, for Malvern being an example. But we provide programming. It's cost-free to kids. It's for ages 6 to 14. We're in neighborhoods like Malvern, Thorncliffe, Regent Park, Rexdale, Jane and Finch, and Mount Dennis. And we also are really focused on having certified coaches and delivering our program. It's very much like if you were paying for a basketball development program, it's the same thing in terms of the quality of the coaches, the equipment, the drills, the scrimmaging, all of the opportunities that we provide on court. The focus, though, being much more about confidence and character development, building skills like that we need for the future of work, such as like collaboration, innovation. And then there's an off-court component as well that's rooted in the culture of basketball. So the old school idea of basketball is a sport. It's just a sport, but you look at WNBA has been at the forefront of connecting social justice to sport. You have current players that are producing films, running media companies. GQ has more basketball players in it than film stars in terms of looking at them as fashion icons. So and music, you can't separate music from basketball or basketball from music. So there's this bigger opportunity with the culture of basketball in a very organic way to connect kids through the sport first and foremost, but then tap into all those other interests and all those other potential areas that they could be really passionate about and interested in without ever losing the feel of basketball. It's not like we brought you to this basketball program and now we have you in like some science program. We might be doing some programming that's connected to science, but it still has the feel of basketball. And then I know, Michaela, I know you could talk about like in terms of what the goes behind the coaching and what goes behind the programming in a little more detail.
Yeah, for sure. So basketball really is just a vehicle for education, for travel, for relationships, for growth and personal challenge, to build confidence, for a healthy lifestyle, etc. So a big focus for us is approaching the kids as people first, and taking those opportunities to coach the life skills that go behind the punctuality, the collaboration, the problem solving, as opposed to focusing it on a winning mindset or on we need to win games, we need to get to this tournament, we need to have so-and-so record by the end of the season. There's definitely more of a focus on, meeting those kids as people, meeting them where they're at in their situations, and focusing on helping them grow as individuals and as youth in the community, more so than as basketball players. They go hand in hand, but the intention is different in the day-to-day coaching.
That's amazing. So I'm hearing this winning mindset is not limited just to like winning games. It's also limited to winning in your relationships and being, you know, an upstanding citizen, etc. So I'm getting a sense that your program is like well-rounded in a sense. Okay.
Yeah, like so the World Economic Forum has a report that talks about the fact that I think 6 or 7 out of 10 kids will be in careers that don't currently exist. So that's kids who are in middle school now. By the time they're in the workforce or whatever, the jobs that they'll be in don't exist right now. And so they've identified these 35 skills that are really going to be important regardless of what type of career it is. And it is complex problem solving. It's managing stress and anxiety and change. It's collaboration. And so we're looking at it like, yeah, the dream of playing ball professionally is like almost nobody makes that. There's this other dream that's sold is like, oh, well, maybe you could work behind the scenes, like in management or in basketball media. That's also almost nobody. But if you are to say like, you know, maybe a kid who wasn't really interested in basketball, you know, some of the communities we've been in is like, you know, kids are more interested in cricket, soccer, whatever. They come in, they play basketball, but they, you know, say later on in their life, now they get this opportunity to like take a journalism internship in the United Arab Emirates or something. And they've never done that before, but they have that, you know what? I'm going to say yes, because I know I've been able to do something I didn't know how to do before. And I think basketball is that thing that can be that gives you that confidence, gives you those skills that you're going to need no matter where you end up. We saw this other amazing stat it was something like 90% of women who are in executive positions in the United States played collegiate sports up till college or university. So you see like the role that sport can play in building successful lives in any area that you pursue.
Love this idea, that metaphor of it being like a vehicle, a pathway towards other things as well, not it ends in and of itself, especially since there's limitations in the industry, as you were mentioning, Chris, and also looking at opportunities within that industry to connect with, you know, multiple different pathways to exploring, whether it be fashion, music, and these entryways. So that's really interesting in terms of strategy for personal development and professional development within a game that's keeping you healthy. So these are good things I'm hearing for sure. I wonder if you could provide us with maybe a bit of a visual on what your program actually looks like, so we can kind of get a sense in a different way of what you're doing on the ground. And we're about to start to talk about that, moving on to online. So yeah, let's get a sense of your program.
Well, and just the disclaimer is that what you're going to see is our virtual program, where there are in-person programs, you know, is looks like any basketball development program. But yeah, Mikhail, you have the video?
Yeah, so for our virtual program, first of all of the activities were modified for kids to be able to do the full program in a 5x10 square foot space in their home. So things like dribbling aren't happening in the house, of course. We have provided the kids with layup kits. They each have their own gym bag with all of these items in it, so you can see we've provided them with their own basketball, which is good for some of the activities outdoors. They have a mini rim for some of those physical literacy skills, indoors, throwing, catching, aiming. They have some of these off-court items. So the curriculum itself for the live Zoom sessions has been modified for kids to be able to do everything in their home. So here you can see an example, one of our coaches.
We're gonna go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wrap it around your knees. Good job, guys. Don't stop. Keep going. Keep going. Watch how Coach Mike is doing it. Good job, Emmanuel. Very good, Aegis. Very good, Nazir, Layla.
So you can see this is the calendar for our coaches. So you can see on Mondays and on Fridays, all of the kids are in live sessions, kind of like this one, where it's basketball skills and activities that have been modified to be done inside their homes. So you can see here we have 2 groups going on at a time. We've got 3 at this time. So these Mondays and Fridays are all these live sessions. And then the kids also all have a off-court activity. So for example, they built a mini catapult as a STEM activity.
Yeah, it's a mini hoop and a catapult.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use the elastic bands to keep it in place. So you have 2 elastic bands left over. You just need to make sure the spoon is attached to the top popsicle stick. And you can look at the pictures on the screen to help you as well.
Wait, so what do you do? Don't.
So I have my 2 pops.
So that's one of the activities. It was actually pretty cool. This is one of it completed with one of our coaches who shared it. So they built this catapult and then the mini rim, and they're able to shoot different objects of different weight. It was a STEM activity. We also had a guided paint night. So all of the kids have 2 days of those live activities. One of the days is an off-court activity. And then the other 2 days are home challenges. We use Google Classroom. Each of the coaches have their own Google Classroom with their kids, and they're able to provide home challenges such as this one. Okay, hold on. For example, so on 2 of the days of the week, they will post their assignment. They give brief details. They always provide a video where they're speaking and sharing the instructions with the kids as well. So we have Coach Mahal here.
Hi, Go Dream Team. It's me, Coach Mahal, and today is challenge day 4. Earlier on Globetrotters, and it's
she'll
called
explain the challenge,
different trick shots that are
give the kids the instructions, and then see here there's a link the kids can go watch, so they're able to go ahead and submit this themselves. So yeah, that's an overview of our summer program right now.
You want to show the mixed recap as well, the kids
yes.
doing the challenges. So one of the things that we're seeing is there is this balance, like we want to have them doing some of the creative activities that are rooted in the culture of basketball. So whether they're making a mini hoop or they're doing sneaker design or we're doing like the paint night, but it's a basketball kind of setting. But then we also have these challenges where they, through the Google Classroom, as Michaela outlined, have the coaches very personal, giving the video. There's a lot of phone calls involved as well to maintain that contact, and then they can complete these challenges. And here's an example of a few of them.
Hi, I'm Tyrone, and this is my hopscotch challenge.
Hi, it's Price. I accept Coach C's challenge. See you on class on Friday.
That might be my favorite video to date. But the challenges are really, we've used some of Jay's Care's home challenges. Harlem Globetrotters have been putting out great videos. MLSC has a camp at home. So we have a list of challenges that are already selected for the coaches, but our coaches have done a really good job of taking ownership of their groups, getting to know their kids, and making adjustments as needed. But we have used those external providers for some of those challenge days.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that like one of the things that we looked at early on when we were venturing into this was that we're not going to create content if there are others that are doing a great job at that. So like Michaela said, the Jay's Care Foundation has some amazing play-at-home activities. MLSE and MLSE Launchpad and Foundation did some great stuff. So, you know, and then you have global things like Harlem Globetrotters, and there are other sources that we drew on, so we could incorporate those resources and materials into our programming rather than like creating the layout version of exactly the same thing that some other great people in the field and leaders in the field have made.
Yeah. It looks like your programs are broken down by age. Is that right? And does that, are the groupings the same for, you know, how you've had to pivot to offer programs online as they would be in person? Like maybe you can just briefly describe like that breakdown.
Yeah, we've actually, before this, our programs were 6 to 11 years old and then 12 to 14. But we did narrow those numbers down. So now we have a 6 to 9-year-old group, and then we have 10 and 11 co-ed and 10 and 11 girls only. And we have a 12 to 14 co-ed and a 12 to 14 girls only. So that was something that was discussed early on in building this program, that it was gonna definitely be necessary for best engagement online, and for the curriculums to be at the right level for each of the kids and each of the participants.
Yeah, and we saw some of the research around online programming and education, and also some of the stuff we drew on from the World Health Organization and other public health units around the world, that social connection is so important. And there is a social connection between mentors or like, you know, coaches, et cetera, but they're also creating some more social connection within peer groups and those smaller age ranges. Online, when you think about like the gap in a gym between a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old is big. Online, that is really amplified. And how does a 10-year-old feel like doing a program with like 4, 5, 6-year-olds on the you know, where their skill levels are different and stuff? It can be a little alienating. So that smaller age group was important.
For sure.
It looks like you're using like a combination of like Zoom and Google Classroom. And I'm wondering, you know, someone asked who's joining us today, and I think this is something that we've talked about before. I mean, what about fatigue? You know, we all, I think, are experiencing a certain amount of Zoom fatigue, FaceTime fatigue, Skype fatigue, whatever it is, whatever tools you're using to connect, because there's a certain energy that communicating this way requires. It's very different from the kind of energy that may be required for an in-person learning or networking or engaging opportunity. So I'm wondering, obviously, like we've kind of gotten the sense from what you've shared about how you had to adjust the activities. But I'm wondering in terms of like the challenges that you may be facing that may be beyond the activities, but in terms of engagement and coaching and relationship building, community building.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk about from the program design side, and then Michaela, I think if you talk about it from the coach side, like in terms of program design, when you look at it, we only have 45 minutes to an hour. Hi, sorry, that's my baby there. 45 minutes to an hour that the kids are having per day. So we're not trying to replicate the typical summer program we did, where you maybe show up at between 8 and 9 and you're out between 3 and 4. It's not a full day. You can't, we're not trying to sustain that. There are some other models, like Canon is doing a photography program with kids where it's really intense for 5 days. Our programming is 2 sessions that are both a month long. So when we looked at public health information, that kids require 75 minutes vigorous activity or 150 minutes moderate activity per week to maintain their physical, mental, and emotional health. And so our goal was to provide that much physical activity. The variety is really important too, to avoid the fatigue, which is like those direct Mondays and Fridays where they're with the coaches in the basketball sessions. Then there's the challenges where they're, you know, in their home, or they're going outside or wherever to complete those challenges. And then there's the creative activity based in the culture of basketball. So we try to avoid that fatigue. Also recognizing, like, you know, parents, guardians, siblings, etc., are in the home too. And if there's a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old on, that's the whole household is pretty much like in limbo while that's happening, or in support of that. So we also can't take up like cause the fatigue for the whole household by trying to do the whole day. And then, but the coaches, it's another story. Michaela, you want to tell that?
I was really, really worried after the first week, because a lot of my coaches were just exhausted. So some of them have 3 sessions a day, some of them have 2 sessions a day. With our younger groups, it was absolutely necessary to have 3 coaches. And some of our older groups, there's only 2 coaches. So I think after checking in with them after week 2, a lot of the coaches' energy and mental space was at a better level. I think that the first week was a little bit of a whirlwind because the schedule looks straightforward in the Google Calendar, but each group and each coach has, like, the Mondays and Fridays are the only thing that's consistent. So in between is kind of mix and match. But our coaches have been able to find those challenge days on Google Classroom are usually a little bit more of a rest day for them. Which is really helpful. They just have to engage with the kids and make sure that they post their challenges. And on the off-court days where we have facilitators coming in, that's lower maintenance for our coaches as well. They're only there to help and support in whichever way needed. Their participation has showed more engagement with the kids, so we definitely do want them on those calls. But having those 3 days in between has proven to be a little bit of a mental break. And as they get to know each other better, as they get to learn Zoom and Google Classroom, our Google Calendar better, the tech difficulties are less exhausting, and they're finding a better chemistry amongst each other in terms of how are they splitting up duties, how are they collaborating to work on this, building chemistry on the call, and little tricks with the kids. So now for the space and equipment setup, they're posting on Google Classroom with a picture and a list of the stuff because before the prep calls, some of the kids would still show up without the space and equipment set up, and then that takes time out of your 45 minutes to get those things done. So little tweaks and adjustments that our coaches are making as we move forward. That's helping them with their energy, their mental space, working together a little bit better. But for the kids, one of my coaches with the 6 to 9-year-olds mentioned when the warm-up is hard or when the first drill is like physically tiring, they lose the kids for the rest of the session. It's really hard to reel them back in. So things like finding a good call to attention, things like setting those standards and expectations early on in the program, that first week of the program, things like that have really helped in terms of where their energy is going, where their time is going, where their efforts are going throughout the rest of the program. So
yeah, and I'll just add that, like, it's a different job. You know, like we have all this amazing team of coaches that come from a combination of youth work backgrounds and basketball backgrounds that are amazing within the gym or with their off-court programs. But this is performance. Like, part of our training that we did, we had a number of partners, but The Score, which is like a sports media platform, used to be a channel, now it's just all digital. We had people who are broadcasters helping us with the training because they're helping you to understand that to keep that engagement up throughout the whole thing, the way you speak, the way you present yourself, the way your background is set up, your lighting, like the energy that you have to give. That we have multiple coaches on, which seems like a really high ratio, 2-3 coaches for like 8-10 kids. But in order to give feedback, in order to not just be passive, you might as well be on Instagram Live or Facebook Live, where if you're just saying something and not engaging. So to create those layers of engagement, to keep that energy up, it's in some ways like you're a performer. And then you're also like, you're almost like borderline sales outreach in terms of continually having to call parents, call the house, like anybody out there right now, you can say, you know, if you're a professional in this field, how difficult it can be to manage between like Zoom calls, your Google Calendar, even though you're at home, sometimes you might be late for like online meetings. Like for us, and this is our profession, it can be challenging. Imagine like for children and youth. So the coaches play a huge role in that kind of outreach. And these are things that are new for them, that we had to like design curriculum. Michaela led that, a design of curriculum of coach training as well, from the ground up.
That's great insight. And we are getting questions, and I remind everybody watching to please continue to use the question and answer box to share some of your comments and inquiries. And I want to address some of the questions that have been coming up because I find that we're actually answering them as the conversation continues. So I just want to kind of cycle back on some of that content. There was a question from James from Canadian Roots Exchange, and James was asking about how we're transitioning from a physical program to a digital program which we've spoken quite a bit about, but he was also wondering about, how your evaluation is also transitioning. So I want to put a pin in that question, thinking about, it seems, YouthREX is supported with the evidence brief, and using evidence to inform programs is really important, but how are we learning moving forward? That's something I want to put a pin in. I want to jump back to some other comments here and questions. There was an anonymous question about what's the biggest challenge that you're coming across as you're trying to move to online content, and what kind of support did you receive in making those transitions? We've talked a little bit about challenges with tech and space, which is another question that was brought up in terms of how are you dealing with access to computers and bandwidth issues, privacy, space issues. So we've spoken a bit about these things, but I just wanted to kind of just present it as a combined question. Are you seeing some other challenges that we haven't yet spoken about? And what kind of supports are you receiving to meet those challenges? That's the first one. And then we'll talk a little bit about evaluation.
Oh, wow. Like which one do we refer to? Like there's a lot of challenges. I think one of the things is, I would say first off, is striking the balance in terms of engagement. There are some households that appreciate the phone calls, or and others where like, can you stop calling? Like, we're good. We have the Google Calendar thing locked down for us. There's settings where there's other things going on, and the kid wants to have the camera off, or the family might want the camera off, and that means that they're not getting feedback, and that can also turn into a ripple effect. If too many of the kids start turning the camera off, then we've all been in those meetings where it's like 5 people are on it, 3 have your camera off, 2 have it on. Eventually you turn yours off too, because it feels awkward. Like, why am I on a video when everyone else is just on audio? So there are challenges like that. I think early on, one other big one I would share is that we were really fortunate. The Ani Foundation is one of our partners, and they are new foundation and really nimble. And so when we made the case about why we wanted to do the virtual programming, we pivoted pretty like late March, early April to start designing it. They were able to support. But there are a lot of organizations and larger institutions and funders that at that moment weren't ready. It's kind of like wait and see, and it's kind of like the cruise ship turn where it takes much longer for them to pivot. And if we had have been relying on some of the larger and traditional funders, we might not have been able to pull this off. And I think there's a lot of organizations that might not have had that relationship with like a nimble funder that could take that risk. That maybe that's why they're not able to get into the virtual programming as quickly as we might have. And yeah, those are my main 2 thoughts.
Yeah. One thing, I'm learning a ton in all of this, but one thing that I think has been really positive is we have a really good team of coaches who are able to all take ownership of their groups. They're getting to know their kids. So having check-ins with them on a regular basis with the coaching units together. Initially, I was going to do just one big all coaches call, but I found it more successful in terms of getting information and specifics for their groups and for their group of kids. And doing those one-on-one check-ins, and they've provided a lot of good insight in terms of how we move forward. So, for example, one of the things we found is our girls-only curriculum for the 12 to 14-year-old is the same as the co-ed one, because I'm not one to believe that you should train girls differently than guys. But the girls who want that high-level basketball training have joined the co-ed group. A lot of the girls that are in the girls only program are looking more for engagement. They still love to compete. They still love the basketball, but they're not really wanting to work on their defensive shuffles, let's say, right? So just making tweaks to that curriculum. A lot of issues with computer literacy and tech onboarding. A lot of times it's just really simple fixes. So I found that screen recordings to show people like how to walk through the steps is helpful. That way, when they tell you that button's not there on my computer, yes, the button's there. I can show you where it is. So tech tutorials have been really positive as well. And checking in with coaches in terms of, are they keeping true to the curriculum that was built? Are they having to adjust a lot of the activities? Are they having to veer off of the structure and the plan a lot, which the goal in coach training was to equip them to be able to make those adjustments on the fly, right? It was to equip them to be able to recognize which things need tweaks and which kids might need more coaching cues. We use breakout rooms for different skill levels, because sometimes some kids will have it really quick and some kids will be struggling. And how do you meet both of those kids and their experience online, right? So using the breakout rooms, using the chat, as well as the reactions, as well as the raise hand button, are things that have proven to be useful. So a lot of learning moving forward. I found that the best way to learn is to just keep checking in with the coaches, since they're the ones that are in all of those sessions hands-on, but also finding the right questions to ask.
Yeah, you know, and that sparked something for me too, like just going back, like before, when we knew we were going to do this programming, we made, I think it was like 400 to 500 phone calls based off of like anyone who had been a layup participant within the last year, just to see, would you be interested? What kind of tech do you have? Do you need? Are you involved in social media? Do you have a laptop? And then we had to do that round of calls again when we were doing the putting that registration out. So we put it online, we put it through a newsletter, but we also are thinking of equity and access, and not everyone's like, you know, looking at the new layup newsletter or checking online, right? So how do we ensure that everybody who in the layup community has that equitable access to the registration? And then once the registration was full pretty quickly, then now it's another round of calls and setting up orientations, where to be in the program, you have to do your orientation for the program on Zoom. Because if you can't get on Zoom for the orientation, then you're not going to be able to get on for the program. But then that brings these other questions of like, okay, well, some families needed laptops, so we had to make arrangements with different partners and stakeholders to get them laptops. Some of them were able to use the TDSB ones, but we also didn't know whether they were going to be able to keep the TDSB ones over the summer or if they would have to return them.
And TDSB actually blocked Zoom on the computers. So plot twist, right?
And we found that one out pretty late in the game. Then there's like Wi-Fi issues, and some people were saying we want to use it on the phone, but they have data limitations as well. So and that was something from the layup kits that you saw at the beginning, where we designed the curriculum, and then we have these resources physical for the program, but then there's also the tech resources there, and then there's food security as well. It's another, so we have some partners around food and security as well. And all of these things, rolling them out is such a huge challenge. And I think it comes back to this notion that online programming is often seen as easier and less expensive. But in our experience, to do it with equity in mind, to do it with complete accessibility, and to do it where you're not just relying on the social capital of each individual, but you are ensuring everyone has all the resources they need to fully participate, that in time and staffing and outreach and mobilization, and then actually accessing the physical resources and getting to them, we're finding it is way more of a lift than our in-person program.
I can imagine a lot of folks who are joining us today are facing similar challenges, because really, like, we're only, it's been 4 months, I think, since we've all had to kind of change the way not only, we work, but how we move through the world. And you've obviously had to make a lot of decisions and mobilize resources to support that work in order to continue providing programming and doing it in a way that is going to match the needs of the young people with whom you work. And you're sort of making those decisions in real time and learning as you're doing, it sounds like, and that's so based on, potentially, different communities or different families, even the different needs that are arising. How are you capturing what you're learning? Cyril mentioned there's questions around evaluation. How do we learn from this time? Because we're trying to be responsive, but we also want to be proactive so that we're sure that we are, capturing these learnings. Because, you're, as I said before, you're becoming sort of experts in how to do this work, and other folks in other communities are becoming experts in how to do this work in their communities. And how are you being intentional, if you're able to, given time and resources, to learn from what you're doing and learn the impacts of the changes that you've had to implement so quickly?
I can start on this one. First of all, Google is awesome. It answers all of your questions. So when you don't know what questions to ask, it's provided some help and some insight. I've used a ton of your resources as well on the under the evaluations tab in YouthREX. So that helps guide in terms of what questions to ask and what to look for, right? Because I know I can speak for the team that we put this together, and then July 6th, it was like, all right, go fly, little bird, right? So it happened really quickly, and finding that time in between to start asking those questions wasn't really possible because coach training went into the first week of program, right? So just finding what questions to ask, what kind of things to look for, and what were our goals before. In terms of when we were planning this, what were our goals and where are we kind of at in terms of meeting those goals, I think has been a big thing. And also having such different perspectives on our team. Our core team is very diverse and brings a lot of different experience. So having those different perspectives, looking at the same program, looking at the same program that we're building is helping provide different angles in terms of what questions we're asking and what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the different lenses that our team has are huge, and that goes from like the kind of core admin team, leadership team, to the coaches, and trying to have that flattened hierarchy in terms of feedback, like whether it's from a parent, like just one parent telling us, okay, you don't need to call us anymore, we're good. That brings us back to the question, okay, so are we making too many calls? How do we, like, is that something that's right across the board, or is that just an individual, and any feedback we get, someone's turning off the camera, we're asking why. If some people, I think we had 86% attendance rate throughout, on average. So, is that what feedback does that give us? And I think the other thing that's really important to mention is that we've really taken like a more up from the developmental evaluation approach, which, like, certain people are familiar with, but really it's just a lens on evaluation that's like this in real time. Take whatever feedback and input you can document that as much as possible and make changes in that moment. So this is not like a tried out, tested program that's static, that we know, okay, this is what success looks like, this is how we do it, and therefore we can evaluate it in this static way. We're not doing that kind of evaluation at this time. We are taking that developmental evaluation lens to this, so that we are constantly documenting, constantly learning, and constantly applying that feedback. And another thing that may seem like, strange is, but we look at social media as a really important way of documenting. And I think a lot of times, like the evaluation, people have these robust evaluation systems that just are in the back end of the organization, and the results of that sit on a shelf collecting dust, or on a hard drive taking up space, wherever, or in a cloud that you're paying for. But what we're looking at is like, how as much as possible can we bring those things together? Like, what's happening, we're documenting it as much as possible, and we're sharing it through social media. That yes, that gives us communication, that gives us content, that keeps our stakeholders and just the broader community that we're connected to in tune with what we're doing. And then it's a record for us to look back at. When we scroll through what we've done if you go through our social media, you can look at it from one lens, but you can see the pivot from our in-person programming to doing some contests and kind of online digital outreach, to then us, deciding to do the virtual program. And you can see the whole arc. And then what does the program look like? You're seeing that as well.
And internally too, finding some of those areas where there were issues. For example, having all kids onboarding to Google Classroom is, to this day, some of the kids aren't, right? And it's like, if they're not onboarded, they're not getting the program. so creating those video tutorials to send to the kids and help them. There's a lot of confusion around their schedule. They thought they were clicking the live Zoom link every day, right? So each Google Classroom has that group's schedule for the week, and then the coaches write a breakdown of the week. The check-in calls with the coaches, right? It went from one big call to now we're doing small calls with the units. So some of those things that are issues, we are able to spot them right as they arise, and then pivot and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and we solve that on the program and service delivery level, but then that then filters into this conversation about like organizationally and resource allocation and structurally, and then up to the level of like systemically. And we're running that same issue around Google Classroom onboarding through those different levels, to then be how we are operating from that developmental evaluation lens.
Very insightful. Thanks for that. We've got just a little over 10 minutes left, so we encourage everyone to share questions and comments. There's so much rich information here, but I actually want to step back a little bit from the programming details and some of the logistics and kind of go back to the game, kind of go back to basketball. Like, what is your basketball story? How did you get interested in this sport? How has it been a vehicle in your life potentially? That's what I want to ask. Do you have any responses?
I have one quick thing. I see Dory asked about if it's still important to offer all girls programs versus co-ed even online. I just want to touch on that real quick. Sorry to boycott your question. But I think it's absolutely necessary. We've seen differences in how the girls are interacting. I think some of the competitive side to boys at that age group especially can be suffocating to girls. I find that everything from turning their camera off to actually be willing to try new things and participate and compete are things that have proven to be absolutely necessary to still offer that girls only option online.
Yeah, and I think that to the Zoom fatigue question, what I read about why we get it is because you are doing these two things. You're like in a conversation looking at other people, but you're also looking at yourself and hyper conscious of how you are looking and how you are presenting. And so now go to what, especially from that age of like 10 to 14, what we know about girls going through that transition in terms of the formation of their identity, their social groups, and then identity around gender and relationship to boys, etc. Like those factors are really amplified in a camera on setting. And so there's some stuff around girls sport that one of the big things for is a big marker of success is a girl walking into the gym. And forget anything else that they actually do in there, but just to actually walk into the gym, especially if it's a co-ed environment. And there's something similar to walking into this camera space as well. And so, yeah, it is really important to us. But to the basketball question, Kayla, you gotta go first because your basketball story is way more interesting than mine.
I started playing basketball in about 9th grade. I started playing because my older brother played, and I thought I wanted to travel and go to hotels and have team parties too. But I was 6'1" in 6th grade. So for a long time, I would say, no, I don't play basketball just because I resented that question. But once I did start playing, I improved quickly. I was able to play for the provincial team, the national team. I played for 4 years at the University of Minnesota. I coached on staff with Kansas State for 3 years, and then I played professionally in Greece 1 year after that. I also had the opportunity to do scouting across Canada, so helping high school girls basketball players get in touch with and exposed to the right coaches and post-secondary programs to try and provide as many opportunities for post-secondary basketball. So I did that for a year as well, and then I have a short stint working corporate. And now I've been with Layup. So a big pivot from that kind of elite high-level basketball competitive side to now being in the this not-for-profit and people first, players second, life skill development before winning games mindset. But it really touches true to who I am and what I value in my experience with basketball as it being a vehicle more so than a ball is life. So that's my story.
And it's where Michaela's kind of basketball career playing started in grade 9. Mine ended in grade 9 when I didn't make my high school team at Laurier. Tried at grade 10, also didn't make the team. But playing obviously stayed a part of my life, and that's like, just more so like with friends, and just loving the game. But I would say that the sport for me is also, I did an internship at Canada Basketball soon young out of university, and that was really a huge thing for me, doing youth work and seeing the league, this Twilight League, for example, at Driftwood Community Center, and being involved in that, and seeing those like intergenerational things where it's like you have guys who used to just be the kids who are running around Driftwood Community Center who are now older, coaching the younger kids now, and seeing that intergenerational thing. And then I was able to do some coaching under a great coach, Jermaine Holness, he's at Ryerson with Ryerson Rams now, but was a coach at Westview, and that experience of bringing our girls team from Westview to OFSA, and like those little like game-winning shot moments and stuff like that I saw, but also, the bonding between teammates, between coaches, and seeing that arc. I think Jermaine was the first person who really showed me that the priority on who you are as a person over a player, who you are as a player. And the bigger part of that is that when you focus on the person first, they become a better player. And the other relationship of basketball is I actually think in basketball analogies. So if I ever get stuck for my words, like I could always use a basketball analogy. But if you don't know the game, then my analogy is not really gonna help you.
Thank you.
I mean, I played basketball when I was in middle school, actually. But I was born with a brachial plexus injury, so it limits some of the movement of my right arm. So gym class, sports was always very intimidating to me, and I always struggled to feel included in those spaces. So when I was in middle school and I actually made the intermediate girls basketball team, it was amazing. I only got to play 1/4 of one game the entire season, but you still get to be part of the same coaching. You still get to be part of a team, and I think that was something that was really meaningful to me, and it made me feel like I was a part of something that had felt inaccessible. Even though there were limitations to how I could play and engage, it was still a really meaningful experience for me.
Thanks. And since I asked the question, I'll share briefly because we have a few minutes. I have no basketball story, obviously. That's not true. I hope somebody did some kind of corny laughter out there in the ether. As a tall Black man, there was the assumption from family and friends and strangers that you must play basketball. And the sad thing in terms of fate, oh, thank you, Dory, for laughing. The sad thing in terms of fate was I was horrible at the game. I was terrible at the game. My older brother did really, really well. I went to the same school. There were so many high expectations, and I was a flop. They let me play, but I wasn't scoring any points. I won't go into details. But actually, in terms of sports involvement, I actually got involved with the inner city kids rowing team. So this is like the elitist sport of rowing, which is typically private schools, but the public school had a chance. I was involved with that for many years, and I learned so much. I was getting up, rowing on 6 in the morning, Lake Ontario every day, regattas in the weekend. It was a really interesting experience. And there's a conversation about racialization and then play and some of the social political politics that are associated with access to sports and resources. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. And that's why I really like how we started the conversation talking about this as a vehicle, not an end all and be all, or like this idea of a hoop dream, but something that's really connected to life skills development, community building, and that mentorship aspect that you're also incorporating. You were just responding to a question about the ratio of how many young people are working in groups. I think it was 10, or maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Michaela, just so we have that on the record in case those are watching on Facebook Live don't have the chat. But maybe some final words as we're kind of wrapping up on how you see this contributing to youth well-being, especially during this time, this dynamic time with the pandemic.
Yeah, quickly on that question, our biggest group has 10 kids per group. Our younger groups have 3 coaches, and our 10 to 14-year-old groups are good with 2 coaches. But keeping that ratio really small is super important for the engagement. I think it's a great opportunity for us to get to know our kids in a different way. We're literally in their homes. We're speaking with their parents. We're seeing their siblings jumping in the calls. So it's really a great opportunity to connect. I think the biggest thing, and Chris has emphasized this since the beginning that we started building this virtual program, is engagement and really being able to meet those kids where they're at. It's crazy how many basketball skills translate directly to life, but knowing your personnel, knowing who you're working with, knowing their strengths, knowing this kid needs a little bit more encouragement, this kid needs a little bit more coaching or cues, or to be more challenged. So really being intentional about that relationship building, really being intentional about meeting those kids as kids first, and understanding that, okay, punctuality might be an issue with this kid, but it might not be about them, right? Or they're not wearing their layup t-shirt today, were they able to wash it, right? Their camera's off, maybe she hasn't had a chance to get her hair done and she's feeling self-conscious. So this online opportunity kind of exposes everybody a little bit more, but really being intentional about meeting them where they're at and as people first is super important.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, physical activity is essential to every part of your well-being. Social connection is really important, and with social connection being very strained in this time, that there's that added importance. But like I think of like the power, like basketball doesn't matter that much. No, like Phil Jackson, I think, said this quote about basketball players, that like one of the things about it is you have, in the NBA, you have grown men playing a kid's game all their life. Ultimately, a ball going through a hoop doesn't matter, but there are things around it that do matter. I look at myself getting cut from the basketball team in grade 9, because I wasn't as, good enough for the team itself. But I also only got 3 credits in grade 9 when it's supposed to have 8. I got 5 credits in grade 10 when you're supposed to have 8. And so based off of that statistic, we're supposed to have 16 at 16. I had a 50% chance of graduating high school. What if that coach had taken me in, and I had that team environment and that culture around me that was, like developing those skills? But it's the community that it provides. It's the belief in you. It's like someone that you can see who cares about your growth. And that's what we really try to lay up. If you want to go to the NBA or WNBA, we're not necessarily, we would love that, but we're not the place that's trying to bring you there. We're just trying to give you a sense of community, sense of confidence, and bring those coaches into the environment where they care about your progress. And it's just about progress. It's like, if you can't dribble at your knee, you'll learn to do that. If you can dribble to your waist, you can. If you can't cross over, you'll learn to do that. It's all about where you are and making steps forward. And that's life, right? Like, that's what success in life is. It's not about being at a certain point, it's progress. And you have a community and support and the confidence in yourself and the resilience to make a little progress every day.
That's great. Thank you so much. We have come to the end of our time together. Chris, Michaela, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing a little bit about the work that you do, the youth with whom you work, and also the ways in which you've had to navigate a really difficult time, and sharing some of your practices and experiences. I want to just take a moment to remind folks that this is the second installment of a series that is going to continue next Wednesday. We're going to have Gabrielle from the Assembly of Seven Generations join us to talk a little bit about a community mapping project that she worked on, that looked at access to services and supports for Indigenous youth in Ottawa, and also talking about how the ways in which they have been coordinating gatherings of Indigenous youth has changed. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to be meeting with Richard and Vanessa from the Regent Park School of Music to talk about how do you bring the benefits of a community music program online? How do you change approaches to music education when teachers and students can't meet in person. So 2 really interesting conversations coming up that we invite you to join us for. And of course, like, you can keep learning with us all summer. Cyril, do you want to talk briefly about the Skill Up samplers?
We have Skill Up samplers, which are courses that have been taken from our larger certificates. These are free. They're available right now if you go to youthrex.com up until August 31st. So we have courses there about cannabis education, critical youth work, evaluation, logic model development, lots of great stuff. And we do have our cannabis and education and youth certificate that's open right now, the full certificate. So check those out at youthrex.com.
That's where you'll also find our Knowledge Hub, which I mentioned earlier. We've been curating resources to support folks during this time. So we have a COVID-19 collection. It also includes an evidence brief that we initially developed for Layup around how to transition to an online curriculum. You may find that. Oh yeah, no, it was great to collaborate with you.
To justify the way we allocated resources and the way that, like, it was a lot of resources we had to put into developing this, and that evidence brief really made the case for us. So thank you for that, YouthREX.
Well, thank you for asking the question. And of course, if you all have questions that you need support in answering, we're happy to work with you. We look at evidence as coming from research, practice, and lived experience. So we're happy to collaborate to provide you with the resources you need. There also are a lot of resources on our Knowledge Hub that connect to sports programming. So, learning how sports programming can have all of the incredible benefits for young people that Chris and Michaela shared today. So we encourage you to visit our Knowledge Hub. And of course, this conversation, as I mentioned, will be ongoing. And if you would like to join us for an in-conversation, please email us at info@youthrex.com. We'd love to share the space with you. So thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the team from Layup. Thank you, Cyril. And we hope to see you all again next week. Take care and have a lovely day.
Thanks for having us.